All right, time for a new record. I've decided to redo my rankings, so hopefully this is showing properly. I'm hopefully on a better microphone than I have been as well. And we're going to re-rank. We're going to do it based on some new data. I should say in advance, um, about midway through this project, I'm going to completely change how I'm doing it, but I'd already put so much work into the slides that I decided to share them. So I'm sorry about that. But why a new ranking? I wanted to. It's been like a year, over a year, maybe a year and a half since I did a ranking. I want to do a full ranking. A lot of great players are active. There have been 3 tournaments. TTA 14 has probably finished by the time I will release this. We are currently waiting on the semifinals, but a few things have really inspired me to want to do this again now. One is just ran a bunch of stats, ELO performance. There's some babble about it below. Fundamentally, it works kind of different than ELO ratings. It's going to be quicker to adjust to what you're doing, the level you're performing at. And I think it's a useful measure to have in a world where we don't have very big samples. And second, I also did some peak run stuff and another thing I'll talk about later. But the main reason, and maybe I say it next slide, the main reason I wanted to do this again is I wanted to see we have these 4 new players, right? Or not new players, but we have these 4 players in the semifinals. 3 of them would be first time winners, right? If either Piggyman, Tezuka, or Chickeny wins, they will be a first time winner. 2 of those are in contention for the greatest to never win, and Tezuka's not that far behind. And if Smokes wins, he becomes a 2 time winner, and I think that also really has a chance to change where he stands. So I was really interested in looking at these players, but I decided to sort of start at the top and move from there. And we'll see how far I get today. I have so many slides. I also thought it would be interesting to say, if there's a tier, if I have kind of 5th through 10th, say, the person who comes 10th, and then I move on to say like the 11th through 16th tier, maybe I should compare the person who came 10th to the tier below and see if there really is as much separation as I had thought. And so I was interested in sort of comparing between tiers a bit. And I also am interested in seeing who moves around as my instincts for what's valuable, or I come up with new stat ideas, hopefully better ones. See if people move around. I enjoy, and I'll every time I'll show a ranking, I'll have little arrows showing this player went up 2 slots, this player went down 4, which I think makes it look visually appealing. I didn't make them green and red arrows. A sports broadcaster would have done that. Anyhow, also, of course, we have active players and they have the best chance of moving. But in fact, the biggest movement we'll end up seeing here is on some players who haven't played in, over a decade, who I sort of reevaluated what I think they did. So, enough babble. Let's first give you a quick look at my initial top 100, the first time I did it. I did a 5-way tie for first. By the end of this, I will have split up that tie. And in fact, it is possible not all 5 of those players will still be in the top 5. There will certainly be some discussion of it. This is my 1 through 50, and I'm not going to spend too long on it because I've spent forever on it before, and we're about to come out with a new list. Some names to look at, some active players. Delial is active, Seto's active, Was Up is active, Slash of Time is active, Turds, Sir Smokes, Chickeny, Dark Lord, now Akiyama. Scythe was briefly active, so was Bren. Piggyman active. There's a whole bunch of people that can move here that have been playing. Tezuka, Midas, Kazdan was briefly around. Demonic was briefly around. Suikid, no, he wasn't. Yevon is very active and strong. So, and we also have a bunch of players from 51 to 100. Aesela certainly has chances to move up. Short career and just made a semifinals in the first tournament back. Whole bunch of names here. So we've had a lot of the top 100 return. They all have the chance to move. But let's get into our big 4. I've been doing some bar chart races because I think they're fun. But every time I come up with something new to calculate, the top 4 are just miles ahead of the field, right? In champions beaten, meaning games won against a player who is or would become a champion. Yojimbo is 26 and 4th, and he's double 5th place. Kamikaze or MC at 13. You know, in Elo beaten, Delial's in 4th, though that top 4 kept going back and forth. It's very close. And he's, almost double MC in 6th, and a bit less than double Koner in 5th, but like so far ahead. And, in achievement, the gap is maybe a little smaller, but like... Oh, and this is achievement not including Rhinoa and Close, so Deli should actually be at least 8,000. So we should really be comparing Seto to Koner there. And again, it's like 1.5 times the next player. Often it's double everyone, sometimes it's 1.5. There's just such a big gap between these 4 in the field. And I think kind of any... Okay, so there is a case for Doc Evil, but mostly any ranking that doesn't have these players as your top 4 is just ignoring so much of the history of this game at a competitive level. I think it's a really clear top 4. I think, and I will eventually argue for a specific order here. Quite soon I will argue for a specific order, but I think any order of those 4 is legitimately arguable. Probably. Now I'm thinking of counter arguments to that. But fundamentally, the gap between these 4 in the field is so much bigger than the gaps between any of these 4. Whichever of these 4 you have as the GOAT is a very legitimate pick. And I think anyone else, again, maybe with an exception for Doc Evil, is just so far behind in so many categories that I don't see how you can make a serious case. As the 4, I am in fact going to rank them. I am very proud of this graphic I made of Mount Rushmore, where I put in, because we have a big 4, and we have... No, Mount Rushmore is actually pretty messy, because, like... Alright, there are quibbles about every president, but how Teddy Roosevelt got his face on there is because, he put it there, but... And also Thomas Jefferson. Anyways, point is, Mount Rushmore, let's just take it as a cultural artifact and not think too much about it and say this is a beautiful graphics job I've done here. I think of the big 4, I am going to try to rank them this time. And I think the more I look at ELO performances, the harder it is for me to put Deli at the top here. And I've ended up putting him 4th. I think the most important skill is how good are you on a bad day to be a great tournament player. And it is Deli's one and only weakness. I think on Deli's best day, he is favorite over any of these other 3 players, including myself. But I think on Delial's worst day, he is clearly the worst on the list. And on Delial's average day, I guess it could go a lot of different directions, but I think his weakness is consistency, and that happens to be the most important skill. I think there's still like a remarkably good case for him as the greatest. He has won incredible amounts across way wider varieties of formats than anyone else. His finals performances and generally his ability to perform against the best is phenomenal. But the more I look at kind of encompassing how well did you perform over time stats, the more I think he should be 4th. I would love to have me and Deli top 2 because Deli's my favorite person other than me here, but I think I have him 4th, which doesn't mean it's unreasonable, again, to have these players in any order. Now, I think Seto overall is enough more consistent. He's enough consistently higher rated that he's 3rd for me. He ends up being the longest number 1 rated player in the site's history. Everyone here is a good case. But basically, the last 2 players did more. And Yojimbo did a lot more. And I have like 2 more championships and have played like 2/3 of as many tournaments. It becomes very hard for Seto to have the case here when everyone here has done a little bit more than him. And the top 2 have done it even more kind of consistently top results. So I actually think Seto is the hardest to argue at number 1 here. But as I argued in my case for him as GOAT, he comes second in so many things that there is potentially a case for him not being the best at any specific measurement, but being second best at enough that he's overall the greatest. And I think it would be reasonable to have him, very reasonable to have him in like second place. But I think he is the weakest case for first, but a very good case for second or third here. And finally, myself and Yojimbo. I do think Yojimbo's the consensus GOAT. I mean, I think it's pretty clear most, at least a plurality, but probably a majority have him as GOAT. And I couldn't bring myself to give it here, and I put it as a tie for now. We will eventually break that tie. The result will surprise you. But the case for me is my win rates. If you divide by opposition, if you look at different rounds of tournaments, you can break down opposition in different ways. It's consistently higher across the board. My overall win rate is about 5% higher, which is a pretty large gap. And that leads to higher rates of winning tournaments, getting icons, everything. And it leads to higher average ratings. However, Yojimbo has, I think, pretty clearly the best peak anyone has ever had. I don't think you can measure different ways, but I think it's pretty clearly him, and probably by some margin. His 10 tournament run of a win, a round 2, 2 more consecutive wins, a round 3, then 2 more wins, then 3 straight finals is just so ridiculous. And he's the only 7-time winner. So I think the argument for me is just across the board the best win rates of anyone who played for a decent amount of time. But the argument for Yojimbo, and it's a very good argument, is he peaked higher and he did more. And he did take longer to do it. Again, his rates are lower, but at his best, he's better. And overall, he did more. How can he not be ahead? I think there's an argument both ways. But as it is, I think this is the most reasonable way to break down Mount Rushmore. And I will eventually split the tie. Don't worry about that. Just to bring some other performances here, you can see from the average performances, Delhi has been less consistent, and I have been the most consistent. But by peak performance, Yojimbo really stands out. And if you look at our records against each other, Delhi had the second best record, but in the return, all his losses have been to Seto and me. And honestly, he played better than I did, and I lucked him in closed, but it still counts. So he looked before that basically where Yojimbo is against the group. And again, my win rates are very good. Some more records, just different records these people hold. Delhi has the most different types of tournaments won, the only person to win 5 different tournaments. And also, not only has he won 5 different tournaments, if you include TTN, no one else has more than 4, and he's won 6 types of different tournaments. In fact, he's won a whole bunch of different types of tournaments on TTN, so you could even count it as a bigger lead than that shows. He has the most tournament games won. He has the best finals win rate. There are other people at 100%, but no one is 100% having played more than 2 finals games. Delhi has played 7 finals games, 6 finals matches, 1 a 3-way. No one else is better than 2 for 2. He's 7 for 7. It's ridiculous. He has the most wins versus winners. He is tied for most icons, and given that he is active and Yojimbo is not, he will almost certainly take that lead very soon. He has the most Special Edition and Triad Wars icons, 2 tournaments I think are the highest priority, and he is tied for most non-Special Edition and Triad Wars championships with 3, and he has the record solely held for most consecutive icons earned with 6. It's a lot of records. Seto has the most time rated the #1 player for just years and years. I didn't go check how long, but it was a long time. He has the most wins of any player in the Classic 2 tournament types, Special Editions, and Triad Wars. He has the most title matches won. He has the longest time elapsed between his first and last earned icon. Again, the amount of time in which Seto has been a transcendent player is just ridiculous. I think it auto-corrected to 18 Yeast. I must have typed like 18 Yeezer, like gotten the R and S confused in years, and it auto-corrected badly. That's 18 years, not 18 Yeast. He's been dominant so long. He has 8 different years he earned an icon, which I believe is also either the most or tied for most. Yojimbo, he has the most championships, 7. He has the most finals, 13, which is probably his most impressive record. He has 7 championships, second place is 6. He has 13 finals. I think second place is like 8. It's his biggest lead over the field, and it's an incredibly valuable stat. He has the most semifinals with 16. He's tied for most icons with Delhi with 21. He has the most non-special edition Triad Wars icons with 11. He's tied for the most non-special edition Triad Wars championships with 3. He has the most total achievement by a large margin. Achievement is my stat that combines all your icons into one stat. He has the strongest 4 tournament, 7 tournament, and 10 tournament peaks ever. Yeah. And then for me, it's basically all the highest win rates for players who have played more than a few tournaments. Yeah. So I think that's just very clearly the top 4. I think, in my opinion, it would be just incorrect to not have that as the top 4. I looked at the Doc Evil case a lot, and I actually wanted to move him lower. But one thing I did was I took rating performances over your career. And then I said, I used a statistical calculation to say, based on what you did over the time you did it, what rating performance are we at least 95% confident you're better than? Which I decided to call a player's floor. Like, from what you did, we're 95% sure you're at least this good, right? So you could imagine someone winning 70% of their games and they played 10,000 games, right? And you're like, okay, that's a huge sample. You're clearly a true talent 70% player. I'm like 95% confident you're at least a 69% player. Someone else plays 10 games and wins 70%. Now, a 50% player could get lucky and go 7-3, right? A 40% player, that gets harder and harder, but maybe we're 95% confident that player is at least 45%. I don't know, I'm not doing the math right now. But, you know, depending on what a standard deviation is for the sample, that's going to be different. But you get the idea. If you've played a ton of games, I'm very confident. If you haven't played many, I'm not as confident, and your floor will be lower. Doc Evil only played 3 tournaments, yet his floor, the number I'm 95% confident he's at least as good at, is the second highest floor of anyone. And if we compare to overall career, it's the second highest. If we compare to the peaks of other people's careers, even long peaks, even peaks that aren't trying to be all that flattering, yeah, other members of the Big Four pass him, but he's ahead of everyone else. It's ridiculous. And that's his floor. So that made me think, as small as his sample is, and as much as I thought it was against relatively weak opposition, but these are ELO ratings, this adjusts for that, his floor is still so high that I've put him 5th. I think everyone in the Big Four has done so much more, but he played 3 tournaments. He won 2. He made a finals. He's the only other player that has a serious case for greatest of all time. I think he's 5th. I don't feel comfortable putting him higher. I really wanted to put him lower, but I couldn't do that either, because I think the evidence is, even with a small amount of evidence, he's a better player. And he's a better player who did enough that we can credit that. Now, we're going to get into some more debate with him later, because, as I said, I'm going to pull the rug out from under you and use a different rankings, adjust the rankings later. But for now, I think he's just very firmly 5th. I think no one below him has kind of touched what he did, and everyone above him has done something similar to what he did, and then also done so much more over a longer period of time. So my instinct right now is Doc Evil is clear number 5. There's a very good case he's the most talented player ever. If I was doing a ranking like that, I think I'd have him number 1. And I'd probably have Nimloth number 2, arguably his main rival. Probably inarguably his main rival, actually. But I think for tournament showing, I think you got to have those top 4, and I think Doc Evil's 5th. And I feel much more comfortable messing with the order of the top 4 than moving Doc Evil into that top 4. But it's also hard to put him lower. So that's my top 5. Should we get into 6th through 13th? How long have we been going? We've been going 20 minutes. That feels like a good video length, and kind of late at night. So okay, I'm going to stop here, and I'll get started with 6th through 13th next time. Trying to keep these a little shorter, and hopefully deeply controversial. Of course, we haven't gotten to the people who are really potentially going to make a jump in TTAC, but that's good because I'm recording this before that's completed. On the other hand, I think I'm actually going to keep recording these, despite the fact that they'll be behind the times, because by the time I get to the end of this, when I'm really, really fully, this is a sort of tentative ranking right now, and then we're going to lock one in later. And by that time, I think it will be finished. So, cheers.